Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the knife-armed man. In 2018, while researchers were excavating a 1,200 to 1,400-year-old necropolis in northern Italy, they made a gruesome discovery that led to us learning a super interesting story of someone who lived all those years ago. Inside this necropolis, there were the remains of a man, but what set him apart from the others is that he had a knife blade prosthetic arm. Further analysis of his bones showed that his arm had been removed via blunt force trauma. Normally, all those years ago, the wounds would have killed you, if not from the loss of blood, then from infection, because of course this was a time before antibiotics, but somehow this man managed to survive it all, and in doing that, he made himself the scariest prosthetic limb I've ever heard of. He replaced his missing hand with a long knife buckled to his arm with leather straps. In our number 9 spot today, we have KV55. This is a tomb that is referred to by a number rather than a name because we don't actually know who lies inside of this tomb. While this tomb had its modern discovery in 1907, we still haven't quite found the answers surrounding this mystery. To make things a little more eerie, while the walls of the actual tomb are bare, which is bizarre, as you walk down the steps towards the tomb, you'll notice there is some markings leading up to it. You'll see inscribed on the wall of the entrance the words which can be translated to, "The evil one shall not live again." If this wasn't enough to give an unsettling feeling, the coffin inside of the tomb has been desecrated, with part of the face having been removed. So all in all, we don't know a lot about what's going on down there, but it doesn't seem good. In our number 8 spot today, we have Man E. Okay, so normally when you're out in the field searching for mummies and tombs and all of that sort of archaeological business in Egypt, the containers or vessels that the past people are put in are decorated or contain some sort of drawings or writings. So in 1886, when Gaston Maspero, who was the head of Egyptian antiquities, came across a plain burial box, he was a little intrigued as to what could be inside. This box had no information as to who the person inside may or may not be, but the corpse inside was wrapped in sheepskin, which was apparently considered unclean by the ancient Egyptians. When unwrapped, it was revealed that this person had both their hands and their feet bound, and as he looked towards the face of this person, he found what appeared to be a screaming face looking back at him. Back in 1886, we didn't have the same amount of information as we do now, so of course this quickly freaked researchers out and led to everyone believing that this person must have been tortured to death. How scary that must have been. But luckily, with the things we now know, we have a much less horrific answer, thankfully. If the jaw of a person isn't strapped shut, when a body is mummified, the jaw naturally falls open, thus this horrible screaming expression. The real mystery that remains is how this mummy, who clearly wasn't considered a person of royalty, came to be buried alongside kings and queens. In our number 7 spot today, we have the black granite sarcophagus. In 2018, archaeologists in Egypt found a massive black granite sarcophagus in Alexandria, Egypt that dated all the way back to 2,000 years ago. Rumors immediately started swirling about what this sarcophagus might have contained, but the best way to find out? Well, you have to open it, of course. Instead of some crazy curse being unleashed, the first thing that escaped this tomb when opened was a horrible, unbearable smell. Apparently it was so bad that the site had to be evacuated for a while before they could return to finish opening it up. When they finally were able to completely lift the lid, they found a red-brown like sewage water flooding the bottom, which is likely where that horrible smell was coming from. Other than all that gross stuff, inside the sarcophagus were the bones of 3 people. Unfortunately, the mummies did not end up being well preserved, so only the skeletal remains were still intact. It is believed that the people inside may have been soldiers from the time of pharaohs. This is believed because one of the skulls had a crack in it from an arrow. There was a bust found along with the tomb, but unfortunately, due to time past, it has been weathered beyond recognition, but that is not the only way researchers can find out where the soldiers are from and what time period they lived in. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Inca mummies. In 1976, researchers found 2 mummies at a burial site in northern Chile. These 2 corpses belonged to 2 young women who were the victims of human ritual sacrifice. It is likely that the sacrifice they were a part of was one that was carried out by the Inca to commemorate either historical or political events, or as a response to a natural disaster. The mummies were found wearing silver ornaments, and they were surrounded by ceramic vessels, and they were wearing red robes. The red in the Inca clothing was often created using hematite or other iron oxides, but upon further inspection of these mummies, it was revealed that the their red clothing held something much more dangerous. The dye used for their clothing contained cinnabar, which is a mineral rich in mercury. This was often used in the ancient world as a pigment for makeup, clothing, and painting, but handling it leads to mercury poisoning. What is strange is that researchers believe that the toxicity of cinnabar wasn't known in ancient Peru, so we aren't exactly sure why they used it in the first place, but it's thought it might have been used as protection against grave robbers. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Faliro Delta necropolis. In 2016, during the construction of a new library and opera house in Athens, crews accidentally stumbled upon this necropolis, which is a cemetery that is the final resting place of more than 1,500 citizens from ancient Greece. And while this is most definitely an eerie discovery and a reminder of our own morality, the horrifying discovery came when they found a small chamber within this one, and inside there were more than 80 skeletons that all had their hands shackled above their heads. How's that for a horrifying discovery? I don't know, I'm gonna say pretty good. Each of these skeletons belonged to people who died young and healthy, and while the exact cause of death is yet to be determined, all signs are pointing to some kind of mass execution. Right now, the best theory as to who these people may have been is that they may be some of the people who were a part of a coup in 632 BC that was led by Cylon against Athens. It's just strange that even after these people passed, they didn't unshackle them, but that might just be a mystery destined to stay a secret. In our number 4 spot today, we have the ancient curse. Alright, so of course we have to have a good old-fashioned curse that was unleashed from inside of a tomb. Okay, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but there really was a curse found on the inside of a tomb. This tomb was the tomb of a pharaoh's official who was thought to have lived around 4,000 years ago during Egypt's 6th dynasty. It was an above-ground tomb that was shaped like a rectangular box. Inside of the tomb, they found a curse inscribed that warned anyone who dared to disturb it. The curse, roughly translated, states anything a trespasser, quote, might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property. It then goes on to warn the trespasser of his knowledge of spells and secret magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. These kinds of curses have been found in other tombs, and while they certainly are nothing like the ones depicted in horror movies about mummies, it might still be a little unnerving to those unearthing this discovery. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Lothagam North Pillar Site. One of the most incredible archaeological finds in Kenya led to well, it wasn't exactly a horrifying discovery, but it certainly was unexpected. Around 5,000 years ago, a tribe of herders paused by a lake in what is now Kenya in order to bury their dead. This ended up turning into one of the most massive and monumental construction projects Africa had ever seen, which is no easy feat. For 450 years, they dug into the bedrock, piled up slabs of sandstone, and buried their dead for generations with ritual ceremonies, and this led to what researchers now consider the earliest and largest monumental cemetery in Eastern Africa. Here's the one kind of unexpected thing that they found here at this site, though. Along with the bodies of those who had passed, researchers also found 405 gerbil teeth at the site. As it turns out, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for this, and it's because they were used to make a headpiece for just one of those who had passed away. This site might not be as large and tall as some of the other monuments like the pyramids in Giza, but what makes them the most remarkable is that this site was made by the people for the people. Not for emperors or kings and queens, it was for tribe members of every age and gender buried alongside each other. In our number 2 spot today, we have the tomb of Hatshepsut. This was the 5th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Egypt, and she was the 2nd historically confirmed female pharaoh. She was an incredibly interesting person who we really could talk about all day, but we are here talking about tombs, so let's cut to when hers was found and unearthed. There were a few interesting things found within her tomb, but the real horrors came after when they began to examine her remains. They were actually able to find a cause of death for her and can actually attribute it to something she possessed. They found benzoprene carcinogenic skin lotion with the pharaoh, and it is believed that this gave her bone cancer. It is likely that she poisoned herself accidentally while just trying to soothe her skin. Being diagnosed with something like that with the help of modern medicine is already a horrible and painful and scary thing. I couldn't even imagine having to go through it all these years ago without any kind of treatment. In our number 1 spot today, we have this ancient mystery. Okay, so this is one of the coolest things I've ever heard, and it has me rethinking my entire career. Maybe I do want to be an archaeologist after all. Basically, researchers have found a 1,300-year-old Chinese mystery, and where did they find it? In a Tomb Raider shaft. This feels like a Hollywood blockbuster, and somehow it's just real, ancient life. While excavating a tomb in China, the team discovered the skeleton of a young man that was riddled with wounds, giving clues as to how he died. The man is estimated to have been about 25 years old, and it is thought that he was harmed and then thrown into the Tomb Raider shaft while still alive, which is absolutely gruesome. It is believed this crime took place between 640 and 680 AD. It appears as though he wasn't a thief because the shaft had begun to be refilled with soil by the time of his death, so we really aren't sure why this young man met such a cruel fate. As a true crime enthusiast, this is absolutely fascinating, and I wish we could find some answers to bring this guy's story full circle. Sometimes, though, these things are just destined to stay a secret hidden in the past.
So let's start off with a bit of a classic to warm us up, the Terracotta Warriors. When laborers digging a well in China in 1974 discovered a life-size statue of a soldier, they had no idea how much more lay beneath them. Archaeologists started excavating, and today think there are as many of 8,000 of these clay statues. Most are warriors, but there are full-sized horses and chariots as well, also dancers and acrobats. All figures have their own facial expressions and features unique to them. This vast terracotta army testifies the absolute power and great ambitions of the first emperor of China. Qin Shi Huangdi, who is buried in the tomb at the site, hasn't been excavated because of concerns about its stability. But if his burial record is any indicator, there are enough traps inside to make for an effective enough curse, notwithstanding the alleged curse the emperor himself placed on it. After all, it did take 700,000 workers 36 years to build this tomb, and supposedly many of those workers were buried alive inside to keep what's inside there a secret. And it's worked. No one knows what's in there. There's also the matter of the potentially cursed Terracotta Army. According to an interview on Swiss Info with one of the many men who accidentally discovered the Emperor's army, there's a widespread belief that these statues were never meant to be seen by other men, and that would bring great misfortune onto the surrounding villages, all because it was a major disruption of the dead Emperor's feng shui. While the Chinese government continues to protect the actual tomb, it will remain a mystery what sort of protection the emperor took with himself to the grave. How about a scary discovery and scary consequence? Tamerlane's tomb. As written in Atlas Obscura, Soviet scientist Mikhail Gerasimov woke up one day feeling spicy and felt like digging up a horrific conqueror Tamerlane to reconstruct his bashed-in face. So, ignoring the outcry of religious leaders, locals, Muslim clergy, literally anyone, these curious yet emotionally stunted anthropologists opened the tomb for the first time since 1941, also ignoring 2 consecutive warnings on the tomb itself not to. The first is in plain sight outside of it: when I rise from the dead, the whole world shall tremble. The second was a surprise hidden within the tomb itself that nobody had opened before these dummies, and it said, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Freaky. So naturally, they cracked the bad boy sarcophagus open. No consequences on the spot means none at all, right? 3 days later, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invades Russia. Few would argue that the push-broom mustache dictator would qualify as an invader more terrible than Tamerlane. Those that dispute the curse point out that Operation Barbarossa was always planned and subtly underway before the opening of the tomb, which is all well and good, but in 1942, Stalin demanded the return of Tamer to his tomb since the body had been taken. When the body was finally returned and buried with full Islamic rites, the Battle of Stalingrad's advantage shifted, changing the course for the Russians to win. So who knows, right? I think your own sudden imminent death counts as a scary discovery. So, if so, King Casimir counts. And 50 years after the mysterious circumstances surrounding King Tut's exhumation, a similar incident occurred in Poland at the tomb of Jagiellon, where the King Casimir rests. Poland was a socialist country at the time of exhumation, so many types of research were restricted. It wasn't easy to receive an agreement to examine historical sites, and it took the Cardinal Archbishop of Krakow to support the researchers, who were just dying to get their hands on the shriveled corpse of the king, and for the final decision to be his to allow the opening of the tomb. Wrong call! Little did they know what they'd stumble upon. Researchers were eager to figure out more after the king's death 500 years ago, and they dug right in. It was worldwide news, as was the curse that the researchers kept joking about that was supposed to take their lives. Unfortunately for them, funny anecdotes become prophecies. As the examination was in process, those involved started to die from strokes and infections. Within the first few days, 4 are dead. Within years, around 15 are dead. Yeah, turns out they discovered deadly mold, the same as in Tut's tomb. As many historians have quietly mumbled about, there's always the possibility that maybe, just maybe, that mold wasn't something that grew over time, but was placed by a clever mixologist. Call Guinness World Records because this tomb has the most curses per square foot dead body paradise. Saqqara is genuinely called the ancient city of the dead, and you may have heard of it since it's right up there with King Tut for Egyptian burial site hotspots to visit. Its origin traces all the way back to the First Dynasty, where it hosted burials for more than 3,000 years before seeing its last ceremony and resting sealed for centuries. And with how Egyptian family goes, 3,000 years of royal burials can accumulate quite the cast of characters, many of whom would want to protect themselves and their riches in the afterlife. Essentially, when archaeologists got down there, they had to send the most cynical, non-spiritual MFs they had. There is so much buried there that they turned up over 160 different sarcophagi and countless precious artifacts. Not complete without a few curses inscribed, of course, to prevent grave robbers or genuinely F up anyone who enters the chamber. Akhmahora's sarcophagus essentially warns that whatever's done to against his tomb, the same shall be done onto your property. It also warns that any impure trespassers will be filled with the fear of seeing ghosts. Seriously, immerse yourself in excavating here though, surrounded by 160 mummies deep in the earth, curses and condemnations? Nah. How about a recent discovery that shows us there's still so much out there? The Notre Dame tombs. This month, 4 years ago. Pause. 2019 was 4 years ago. Let me sit with that for a second. Whew, okay, well, in April of 2019, many of us opened our phones or turned on our TVs to a massive shock. The Notre Dame was burning. The 12th century Gothic cathedral was saved by 500 plus firefighters, but had a major structural damage. French authorities call in archaeologists to help make sense of the damage and how to start repairs. They find something else: 2 coffins, sculptures, statues, and unseen architecture. After months of research and scans, they figure out one identity because it turns out to be written on the outside the whole time. Antoine de Pelaporte, a high priest who died in 1710 at 83. In the 300 years since he was buried, his coffin was damaged and allowed air to enter, so he was mostly bones and some bits of hair instead of a mummy. The other coffin is Mr. Unknown, and he's rocking mummy vibes. Check him out. He died between ages 25 and 40 from TB, and his pelvic bone region suggests he was a horseback rider. To be buried in the Notre, he's obviously an aristocrat, and he was buried with a flower crown, which is super cute. Both men were buried in lead sarcophagi, which was a practice reserved for the elite. Still, the 2 coffins are also quite different from each other, and this shocking find tells us the Notre is still full of secrets to uncover, and if there's 2, there's safe to assume there's more. A Grecian cemetery holds terrible secrets at the bottom of a well. The Karmikos cemetery dates all the way back to the Bronze Age, so around 2700 BCE. It was first excavated by archaeologists in 1870, and since 1930, excavations have continued and thousands of tombs uncovered. As you can imagine, through years of excavations, lots of messed up things have been discovered in said tombs. Weird bodies, weird deaths, buried alive, and now in 2020, a collection of 30 inscribed lead tablets were found at the bottom of a well that's 2,500 years old. Which sounds creepy enough as is, but the tablets each bear individual curses and prayers to Greek gods of the underworld. AKA it's like Grecian culty Satanism stuff, as well as the fact that the well was poisoned and in the middle of a tomb yard. Jutta Strokazek, who led the excavation, said that whoever ordered the curses inscribed on the tablets was unnamed, but the black magic is present and there for all to see, even if forbidden in Greece at the time. And while the well was only just found in 2016, as mentioned, the site was first excavated in 1870. But progress halted when World War II broke out, as all members of the excavation team joined the forces, and then every single one died back to back to back. While it's hard to pin that on the curse itself, it does follow the trend set by King Tut and Casimir. A recent discovery changes the history of the Philippines, the Lost Millennia tombs. Our world still has discoveries to be made, and archaeologists have proven that when they unearthed the remnants of an 1,000-year-old village on a jungle mountaintop in the Philippines. I'd say this is more of a shocking tomb discovery than scary. I'm just excited about this. The game changer is the discovery of limestone coffins, a type that's never been found before in Southeast Asia. This is huge because it's the first indication that Filipinos at the time in history practiced more advanced burial rituals than previously thought, and that they had metal tools to carve these coffins, which we didn't know before. While they're similar to ancient sarcophagi, the tombs differ by being simple, without elaborate decoration or images on the tops or sides. They're just a plain, classy box. And a tooth extracted from one of the skeletons, carbon data confirm they are about 1,000 years old, with 15 graves found in total. Overall, this site is described as a complex archaeological site with both habitation and burial remains from a period of approximately 10th to 14th century. It's the first kind in the Philippines having these limestone advancements. Malani tourism officer Sammy Cortez says after the archaeologists have finished their work, they're gonna open this up as an archaeological site you can visit, the same as the Tut's tomb. For my Twilight fans, you may get your kissing a vampire fantasy, seeing as there are vampire graves in Bulgaria. And it's not even like one, there's a couple. Archaeologists in Bulgaria have uncovered a 13th century corpse at Perperpikion, an ancient Thracian site in the south of the country, belonging to a man in his 40s who had the misfortune of a big ol' iron rod stomped through his ribcage with the purpose of keeping the corpse from rising from the dead and disturbing the living. Oh, and his left leg had also been removed and placed next to the corpse. Insult to injury, they're making sure he can't go anywhere. At the time of the man's death, vampires were perceived as a real threat in many Eastern European and Balkan communities. People who died usually from things like taking their own lives or being fine one day and dying the next in their sleep, for example, were sometimes staked to prevent them coming back from the dead because it was an unnatural death. Amongst the Romani people, anyone who was missing a finger, had an appendage similar to those of an animal, or had a horrible appearance, yikes if you're ugly, was regarded as someone who is dead. In Russia, those who talked to themselves were suspected of being a vampire in nature, so I guess I might be a vampire because that's essentially kind of what I'm doing right now, isn't it? To date, nearly 100 skeletons have been found across Bulgaria, nailed into their coffin with iron stakes or with heavy bricks and stones placed in open mouths. As I've mentioned in many of my recent demon and ghost videos, if multiple cultures report the same creature and the same method of execution for the thing, even before meeting each other, I'm inclined to maybe believe this was real. This tomb hides dirty laundry and family secrets, the Newgrange and Douth tombs. It starts with a dirty story. 11th century Meath County, Ireland, a salacious folktale is passed down for 4,000 years, saying an ancient king who hailed from the tribe of the gods did some stuff with his sister on the winter solstice as part of magical ritual to restart the sun's daily cycle and save the world from endless night. Supposedly, the deed was done in one of the country's huge burial mounds, which the locals have named the Hill of Sin. The hill is now called Douth Passage, a close neighbor and connected to the Newgrange Passage. Its entries are marked with large stones, and on every winter solstice, the sun shines through and lights up the innermost burial chamber. This is supposed to be the result of the magical act that the king performed there. And nearly 1,000 years after the local legend was first written down, ancient DNA suggests to discover that at least part of the story, naturally the grossest part, was actually true. See, the Newgrange Passage is a tomb of over 150 kilometers for a well-connected family according to an ancient DNA analysis. Like a prehistoric version of the Habsburgs, this extended group of relatives seems to have ruled Ireland and maintained its connected dynasties for centuries within the family. Rulers only tend to marry their siblings in societies where the king is actually considered a god, whose perceived divinity exempts them from social custom. The winter solstice claim probably helped these rulers support their godly claim and rally effort it took to move 200,000 tons of rock to build a passage like the Newgrange. That's something the pharaohs of Egypt, the kings of pre-colonial Hawaii, and the Inca emperors had in common. This cave tomb discovery is a new breed of human, Homo floresiensis. Once upon a time, on the isolated Isle of Flores, Indonesia, there lived a colony of little people. Very little people. Liang Pananing is a cave on the island of Sulawesi that is part of an island grouping called Wallachia, which ancient humans traveled through at least 50,000 years ago as a meeting point for the major admixture mating event between the Denisovans and the modern humans on their initial journey to Oceania. Here, anthropologists find 7 remains of 3-foot-tall humans with brains the size of grapefruits, suggesting these 18,000-year-old specimens weren't a quirk of ancient hominin, but rather an entire species of miniature people who existed and overlapped with modern Homo sapiens. Although the odd little humans likely left no descendants and therefore no mark on human biology now, scientists say this is the first documentation of an entirely new species of hominins that apparently adapted and lived for thousands thousands of years in caves on the isolated island. As for their size, their limited habitat and its hot humid conditions may have been the key factors. They may have arrived on the island as African or Asian Homo erectus, and their generation shrank over time. Genetic size adaptation would make sense for survival. Similar factors were also at play for the pint-sized stegodon elephant, whose remains were also found in the cave with the tiny people. Evidence suggests that they hunted the miniature elephant-like creatures in groups. Imagine being the person who uncovers a tiny race of humans. Now that is a discovery, and I'm gonna be keeping up to date with this one.
Starting our list off at number 10, Newgrange. Heading over to the beautiful Ireland, kicking off this list. Newgrange is this massive circular tomb. It's an ancient mound, really, protruding from the earth. It's quite hard to miss. Now the tomb is roughly 5,200 years old, meaning that this passage tomb in the Boyne Valley is older than Stonehenge and older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. That's pretty incredible. Stone Age farmers built this mound somehow, and is 85 meters in diameter and 13 meters high. Again, quite massive, hard to miss. A tomb that takes up an acre of space. Must be nice. Now the passage and main chamber just happen to align with the rising sun on the mornings around the winter solstice. And if that's not fancy enough for you, the tomb is surrounded in a ring of large curbstones. There's actually 97 curbstones that surround Newgrange in total, and some of these are engraved with megalithic art. There's probably one that says Todd was here. Most likely. Number 9, the animal tombs. This tomb was found, of course, as you guessed, in the Valley of the Kings, but the name of the tomb is a number. What in the Elon Musk is happening? Who names their tomb a number? What? KV52, that's the official name, and it was discovered in 1906 by Edward Ayrton. Tomb KV50, KV51, and of course this one, KV52, they all together form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Hidden underneath 6 feet of debris this entire time, the entrance to KV52 was finally found. So when we enter a tomb that had been untouched ideally for thousands of years, we could find anything, right? In fact, whatever they do find is a win. It helps complete this age-long puzzle of humans' history. So when officials opened KV52 and it was pretty much empty, yeah, that doesn't feel too nice. All this time, really? It's empty? There's no treasure? Are we sure? Empty except for 2 boxes, both black and undecorated, which is a little ominous. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a canopic chest that had 4 compartments. Number 8, Luxor Tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago quite often when we refer to these tombs, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty. It was tucked away in Luxor, Egypt this whole time. We've missed it for so long. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty. Now, it's pretty obvious that this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official of some sorts, because Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt at the time, and given how this tomb looked when we found it, yeah, they were pretty important. Officials believe that the tomb could have been used as a mass grave due to the large amounts of human remains found inside. Now, it's important to note that this tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty because tools and utensils from that time, which was way later on, was found in the same tomb. Yeah, we're gonna find a spork in that tomb in 5,000 years and be like, oh yes, more ancient tools. Number 7, ancient curse. When officials found the tomb of Ankh-Mahor, aka a pharaoh official from 4,000 years ago, they also happened to find a curse. Yeah, for real, this one was written on the wall, right there. That's how you know that you're screwed. Buried in Mastaba, an above ground massive tomb held this warning. It reads, "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." And it also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. So if you enter this tomb, you magic, you might see some ghosts, I don't know, I'd be out of there comedically fast. You would read that and then look down and my shoes would be left there, that's it. I would be gone, my shoes would be left. Like a cartoon. Number 6. Celtic warrior shield. Now this one was referred to as the most important British Celtic art object of the millennium, so yeah, not a bad title, I guess. That's pretty cool. An ancient Iron Age chariot burial was discovered in Yorkshire a few years ago, and our researchers were actually excavating a house development in Pocklington. They didn't mean to find this, but then all of a sudden they find a soldier's tomb, and they're like, all right, I guess that's lunch. Are we rich? I don't know. The soldier was laid on a chariot. It was beautiful, but he had a Celtic shield laid over top. Now this shield was also dated back to 175 BC. A lot of history, lots to unpack here in an accidental tomb finding. First of all, most Iron Age shields up until this point didn't have a scalloped edge, but for some reason this one here did. We thought metal shields were only used for ceremony, but this one's been used in combat. It's been repaired and then used again, it seems. There are clear sword marks around the shield, each that tell a story. Yeah, let's just go poke around a Celtic warrior's tomb. What could possibly go wrong? Sure. Number 5. The Sitting Man. Back in 2005, researchers found a Mayan tomb in Honduras dating to around 650 AD. And the body was not lying down, it was actually sitting upright in a chair. Yeah, again, I would run out of that tomb comedically fast. This man was an elite member of the Mayan Empire, it seemed. He had passed away around 650 AD, and his legs were crossed, and he was rocking jade jewelry. It was a beautiful setup. The tomb had also been positioned upright, like I said, and these types of tombs, they're quite rare to find, but the fact that this one also had somebody occupying it, still sitting up, still cross-legged with their jewelry, that's beautiful. It's double rare. Usually people come in and grave rob, but this is lovely. Would you ever walk into a tomb? Sound off below. This is a terrifying job. We have home funerals today that are kind of similar to this. I saw a post recently on Reddit where a guy, instead of an open casket, he was just sitting on the couch with his clothes on, like dead, as if he was still alive. And that's an interesting way to do a funeral. I don't know, it's kind of like ancient Egyptian, kind of terrifying. I don't know how I feel about it. Number 4, Paris catacombs. Of course we have to mention these ones, so haunting. Have you seen As Above, So Below? Yeah, I'm never visiting this place. These catacombs date back to the late 1700s and they're literally full of bones. So it's no surprise that some entrances and compartments have been blocked off, ideally, hopefully, forever. The catacombs' history is pretty twisted, it's pretty sick. When the city's cemeteries were filling up, and I mean that in a literal sense, officials began moving bodies all over the city, just trying to spread them out, just off the roads ideally, maybe, and hopefully to these abandoned mines. Eventually those started filling up and now we don't know what to do. But the catacombs did open in 1809, so, you know what? What a fun family excursion we have now. Let's go see the whole maze of bones. All these bodies that were occupying the land, they just stacked them up. Now it's a tourist attraction. I feel sick to my stomach. They designed the catacombs with the walls of skulls to ensure that visitors would meditate on the idea of death. Lovely, let's go home, I'm terrified. Number 3, Poland double tomb. All right, here we go, 2-in-1, time to get cozy. All around the world, there have been a handful of 2-person tombs discovered. Now, this is the only one that they found in Poland, so pretty impressive, have to mention it. Back in 2015, archaeologists discovered this 2,000-year-old necropolis that had been sitting there for centuries, just at peace. And then we came along with flashlights, and now we gotta open things up and lick rocks to see what year dates back to what and whose skull is whose, right? Whatever geologists do. Lo and behold, they were around 120 tombs in total. Yep, and now they're all awake. Awesome, here you go. Enjoy your resting, we're here now. Now you're a museum. They were used from the 1st century AD to the 3rd AD. Now among these 120 tombs were a 2-in-1 that stood out. Tombs that archaeologists referred to as princely. Pre-war's culture and Kujawi were in fact Celtic, so their burial process was also Celtic. Now it's a little odd to see a Stone Age Celtic necropolis in Poland, so yeah, it's like history just collapsed into one little ball, and then we found that ball and we're like, oh, what's in here? A lot of spiders and let's get rich. Number 2, the Tomb of User. Back in March 2010, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities released this photo. It was a 6-foot-tall slab of pink granite and it was carved over 3,500 years ago. The door was found near a Karnak temple in Luxor, and it originally belonged to the chief minister of Queen Hatshepsut many moons ago. Now User was a high-ranking official for over 20 years, so in turn he got his own fancy tomb located on the west bank of the Nile. Egyptians associate the west with the land of the dead, so that's why they're all over here. The actual slab of granite though, this door, it was found originally far away from its home. It had been moved thousands of years later and somehow it ended up in an ancient Roman era building. Yeah, never thought I'd have to say this, people, but don't steal doors from the dead. That guy for sure got cursed. Okay. And finally, number 1, the Alexandria Black Tomb. Speaking of curses, this one's pretty heavy. We found a mysterious black granite tomb in Alexandria back in 2018. You probably remember this, right? And somebody thought it was a good idea to open it up And it was exactly what we thought it was going to be. It was bones and sludge, and it smelled so bad everyone ran away. It was horrific. When archaeologists found this massive tomb, again, untouched for over 2,000 years, on one hand, sure, that's a great find. It's a fascinating discovery. Lovely, it's a feat in itself. But us humans, we're curious cats, right? We want to pop it open, see who or what is inside. What if it's Alexander the Great? What if it's treasure that they used to pay off everybody's student loans? Hey, who knows, right? Let's open it up. Egyptian news outlet El Watan reported that the tomb was lifted just a few centimeters before every official involved at the construction site fled the scene. Yeah, it smelled that bad. They had to run away. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, this man put his entire head in the tomb later on to show us that it is safe and not cursed. I mean, you can use your hand, you know what I mean? You can do this. You don't have to put your head in, you could just do the one hand thing. That works just as well. Maybe a foot, but straight to head dipping? Come on, Mr. Waziri. Watch The Mummy, don't do this. Kicking off the list at number 10, new tombs. Fresh off the press, folks, Egypt announced only yesterday. Egypt, they announced it, yeah, just all of them as a whole. Egypt announced only yesterday that they have discovered 5 ancient tombs in Saqqara. This is fresh news, this is brand new, only a few people know about this. These tombs date back to the time of the Old Kingdom, around 2700 to 2200 BC, so yeah, they're a touch old. The 5 tombs were found northeast of the Pyramid of Menir, a 6th dynasty structure. Now these tombs clearly belonged to a group of people with high value. They were obviously officials. Mustafa al-Waziri, head of Egypt's Supreme Antiquities Council, has since released additional information on who the tombs belong to. How fun is that? That's how fast we're getting to the bottom of this already. This happened like yesterday and we already know who's in the tombs? Okay, great work. The first one belonged to an ancient official named Eerie. There's a deep burial shaft that leads down to a chamber filled with funerary decorations, offering tables, the 7 oils. It looked completely untouched. Well, it was. And of course there was also a limestone sarcophagus. Can't have a tomb without a sarcophagus or two. Number 9, Queen Nefertiti. Just over a year ago, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced the discovery of Queen Nefertiti, the wife of one King Teti. Yeah, here we go, aka the first pharaoh of Egypt's 6th dynasty. They found her burial shaft. There were coffins, of course mummies, artifacts, all dating back to the New Kingdom, meaning the Saqqara necropolis was used in the late period, but now apparently it was also used in the New Kingdom as well. That's news to us. Perhaps the most questionable find was a 4-meter long scroll. That was the 17th chapter of the Book of the Dead. Yeah, nothing like finding a chapter of your favorite book. You're like, where's the rest? Let's find them. It's like a National Treasure movie, only haunting. As well as funerary masks, miniature boats, and 50 coffins. A lot of coffins in this one. Again, this is the first time 3,000-year-old coffins were found in the Saqqara necropolis. This is huge. Number 8, mummified lion cub. Back in 2019, Secrets of the Saqqara Tomb was released, and honestly, what a weekend that was. That was a good time. I remember that one. If you haven't checked it out, I implore you to do so. Officials discovered a 4,400-year-old tomb that belonged to a man named Wache at the Saqqara necropolis. This was pretty close to Cairo, only 30 kilometers away, so you can only imagine this commute ages ago and how beautiful it must have been. This tomb was full of incredible artifacts, mummified animals even. There was a lion cub and over 3,000 ancient artifacts. A lot of stuff, jam-packed this one. When digging up our past, it's tricky because you don't want to ruin any funerary decorations and anything like that and be disrespectful, but you also want to know who these people were. We want to know about our history, what happened, what they stood for before their passing, and why they were so important in the first place. Wache and his family remains were studied, and it appears malaria claimed the lives of him and his entire family. This is also the first mummified cub we've ever found in history, so as far as findings go, this one was jam-packed with history. Number 7, King Tut's artifacts. The Newgrange Egyptian Museum was set to open in 2018, and then finally it did come 2021. And while that's quite recent, the contents displayed inside certainly are not. For the first time in history, King Tut's ancient belongings, all of them, all the artifacts discovered with him, will be on display. See, prior to this museum being open, we only saw around 150 artifacts from his tomb. They all took pieces on tour, a big Egyptian mummy tour, you know. It was like Kiss's final reunion tour, then also King Tut's. You're like, oh, who do I see? Ooh. But now this museum, this grand museum, will house thousands of artifacts. That's over 7,000 square meters as well, might I add. What a display this is. If you have a chance to visit the Grand Egyptian Museum, or if you saw this King Tut World Tour, I'm jealous. I'm very jealous. We have one museum in Toronto, but it's, you know. The Egypt section there is... Number 6, engraved warnings. It's a part 3, so of course we have to include some Paris catacomb creepiness. Yeah, as far as old tombs go, that one's pretty haunting, I'd say, no? These catacombs date back to the late 1700s. Not so ancient, but give me a break, okay? It's part 3, I'm doing my best. When the city's cemeteries were starting to fill up, and I mean that in a literal sense, officials began moving contents from all over to these abandoned mines. The catacombs were opened officially in 1809. What a fun family excursion that must have been. Nice. That or the wax museum. They're like, let's take the kids this way, let's go this way. They designed the catacombs with the walls of skulls to ensure that visitors would meditate on death. That's the whole vibe. Let's go meditate and think about death for a bit in the walls of skulls. Yeah, I'm sure everybody who visits thinks of nothing else. Pretty confident there. In order to ensure this was the vibe of the room, there's a phrase carved above the entrance, and it translates to, "Stop, this is the empire of the dead." I would be like, okay, no problem. Number 5. Necklace from Egyptian afterlife. We're all curious what happens after you die, right? But nobody celebrates the end of your days like the ancient Egyptians. They go hard. They really go for it. Like I mentioned earlier, they would paint doors, leave valuables. Any new tomb we discover has thousands of artifacts, hints rather to what lies beyond. An ancient necropolis was discovered only a few years ago in, of course, Egypt, and it contains dozens of coffins and a necklace that holds a message from the afterlife. Okay, now we're talking. This site is around 2,000 years old, and they're in the process of excavating it right now as we speak. But so far, the tombs and artifacts found belong to an ancient priestess. Nice. A message from the afterlife is pretty spectacular. We want that, we want that. Don't let Rose from Titanic near that one, or else you know what she'll do with the necklace. You know what she likes doing. Number 4, bone compass. Okay, just because we've been talking about graves does not mean these messages or anything have to be written or drawn. Sometimes it can be as simple as leaving animal bones on the ground. Yeah, that ought to speak for itself more than any art. If you see that, you're on your way. I'm not gonna be grave robbing if there's a big old pile of bones oddly placed. What are you guys, like White Walkers, Game of Thrones? What is this? This is terrifying. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground. Judging from the skull, it had been clearly hunted down by humans at the time. That's not the weird part here. The weird part is that all these bones have been carefully separated. There's no marks to suggest that any tools were used, so gross, for one, but researchers believe that this wasn't even used for food. The limbs were placed to point north and south. They used this donkey as a compass. How rude is that? Donkeys in the area of Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre at all. But the way these bones were laid out, something's afoot here. What's the message here? I mean, obviously besides that way's north. Is there any other message, if that? Or were people just bored back in the day? Number 3, mythical carvings. Back in 2014, a 17-year-old cemetery was discovered along the Silk Road, which are these ancient trade roads, ancient highways rather, connecting China and the Roman Empire. In the city of Kucha, now northwest China, this cemetery was found along with 10 ancient tombs, one of which was referred to as M3. All these tombs get their cool nicknames like KB55, that's pretty good. M3, short. Sounds very British. M3, sounds like a British secret agent. M3 didn't have any haunting messages this time around, but it did contain several carvings of mythical creatures. Some creatures that don't even exist. There's a white tiger of the west, the black turtle of the north, the vermilion bird of the south, so far so recognizable, and then there's the azure dragon of the east. Could this mean that dragons are very real? Were very real? Are? I vote R. Please be real. These mythical carvings represent different seasons in the heavens, but what could the other 6 carvings even mean? Maybe the depictions of hell? Number 2, chalk drum. Deemed one of the most important pieces of prehistoric art, this chalk drum is 5,000 years old. It was first discovered by archaeologists in England back in 2018. It was found with the remains of 3 humans. It was featured in the World of Stonehenge exhibition. It sounds like an instrument, but really this chalk drum was used as an art piece. Almost like all of our drum sets from when we grew up. I'm like, oh, we don't actually play that, it's just for show. Yeah, I can't do anything on it. That guitar too, can't play that, just for show. Maybe time of your life, if you're lucky, on a good day, but for the most part, for show. British Museum project curator recalls the findings as remarkable, of course. This was the artistic language throughout the British Isles 5,000 years ago. Radiocarbon dates back to 2890 BC, around the same time of the construction of Stonehenge. So yeah, pretty old. A chalk ball and bone pin were also found at the site, so again, pretty loaded discovery. And finally, coming in at number 1, Celtic warrior shield. This one was referred to as the most important British Celtic art object of the millennium, which, not a bad title at all. An Iron Age chariot burial was discovered in Yorkshire a few years ago, and researchers were excavating a house development originally in Pocklington, and then they find a soldier's tomb. Nice. Also, what's the asking price? The soldier was laid on a chariot with a Celtic shield over top. The shield was dated back to 175 BC. See, most Iron Age shields up until this point didn't have scalloped edges, but this one did. Yeah, we thought metal shields were used only for ceremonies, but this one has been repaired. There are clear sword marks. It had been used many times in battles. My arm gets tired in class if I raise it for too long, you know? I have to do the old switcheroo or hold it up, one of these. This guy was holding a metal shield up all day long. Are you kidding me? I'm gonna go do 1,000 push-ups now and fix that light that I moved when I did that hand bit. Number 10, false doors. Okay, right off the bat, imagine searching for a lost Egyptian tomb, alright? Imagine you've spent years of your life dedicating to this research, and then you find a door. You find an entrance carved into the wall, and this is it. What lies beyond? It's time. You try and carefully open it with a team of archaeologists, but it won't budge, because it's a fake door. It's a false door. Yeah, just a Looney Tunes door. Somebody juked you out 4,500 years ago. Gotcha. Their spirit's been waiting that long to be like, nice, idiot. Alright, we can go. We're good. False doors in Egyptian tombs were quite common in ancient Egyptian times. But if we look elsewhere throughout history, we find false doors in ancient Rome, in both tombs and the interior of homes, so that ought to be confusing for any house guests back then. It's also important to note that Egyptian culture was influenced by Mesopotamian architecture, so we've had fake doors around for a while now. A lot of confusing people for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians believed that these false doors were a connection to the dead, and that spirits were able to travel here and there throughout living and death. Most false doors can be found on the West Wall because Egyptians believed the West to be the land of the dead. Number 9. The Tomb of User. Back in March 2010, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities released this photo. This 6-foot-tall slab of pink granite was carved over 3,500 years ago, and this door was found near Karnak Temple in Luxor, and originally it belonged to the chief minister of Queen Hatshepsut back in the 15th century. Now, User was a high-ranking official and held the position of vizier for 20 years at that time, so in turn, he got his own fancy tomb located on the west bank of the Nile. Remember, Egyptians associate the West with the land of the dead. That's going to come in quite a few times in this video. The actual slab of granite, this door, was found far away from its home. It had been moved thousands of years later and ended up in an ancient Roman era building. Never thought I'd have to say this, but don't steal doors from the dead. Got it? Okay, let's move on. Number 8, Alexandria Black Tomb. What if we found a tomb and then just opened it, you know? What if we found a mysterious black granite tomb in Alexandria, say back in 2018? Do you think it would be wise to just open it because we're curious? Spoiler alert, we opened it and it was exactly what we thought it was going to be. When archaeologists found this massive tomb untouched for over thousands of years, on one hand, yeah, that's a feat in itself, but us humans, we're curious creatures. We just gotta just a little peek just to see who's in there. I mean, after all, it could be Alexander the Great, right? That's the whole point of all this. Egyptian news outlet El Watan reported that the tomb was lifted only a few centimeters before every official involved at that construction site just fled the scene. They straight up just ran away. It smelled that bad. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, this guy put his entire head in the tomb just to show us that it's safe. That's great. I mean, you could use your hand, maybe even a foot, I guess, just a little foot dip, but straight to the head dipping? Come on, Mr. Waziri, be smart about this. Number 7, Valley of the Kings. While March 2020 wasn't the best month of all time by any means, Egyptian officials did locate a secret vault hiding in the sands of the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. Just off the west bank of the Nile, the Valley of the Kings, as its name hints towards, is a pretty historical part of Egypt's past. Again, do we want to open this vault? Probably not, but did we? Yes. Bones and goo and history. What do you know? Surprise, surprise. Number 6, 2020 tombs. Summer 2020, nice. While most of us was stuck inside watching Netflix, more than 100 sealed coffins were found. And yes, they were occupied for the most part. Found, of course, in Saqqara, Egypt, Egyptian archaeologists have never been more excited. Maybe we'll find the body of Cleopatra. Wouldn't that just be dandy? The fact that we found over 100 of these still in great shape is mind-blowing. Grave robbers have been around since ancient Egyptian days, and for all of these to be untouched for this long is honestly unbelievable. These findings date back to 712 BC, which was a period where Egypt was controlled by foreign civilizations. That's what makes this so insane. Like Persians and Greeks, they were all around at this time. The idea that we're finding mummies is great and all, but again, do we need to open all of them up? Maybe there's treasure, maybe there's bodies. Either way, it's not yours. Am I insane? Maybe I'm insane. Do we need to find Alexander the Great this badly that we're willing to disrespect this many souls in the process? Number 5, Luxor Tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time to go. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty. tucked away in Luxor, Egypt, of course, as this list says. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty, and it's pretty obvious that this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official, because at the time, Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt, and officials also believe this tomb could have been used as a mass grave. The important thing to note here is that the tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty, because tools and utensils from that later time were also found in this grave. We're gonna find a spork in 5,000 years and be like, ah yes, ancient tools, interesting. Number 4, 210 sarcophagi. So we thought it was a pretty big deal when 160 bodies were recently discovered in Egypt. This was back in September 2020. Over 160 coffins were found. Wild, right? Well, those are rookie numbers, turns out. For this one, archaeologists found 210 sarcophagi near Queen Nefertiti's funerary temple in the city of the dead, Saqqara. Yeah, there were over 160, surprise. Maybe next time you check in with us, that number will be even higher. Who knows? Hopefully, / maybe hopefully not. I don't know how I feel about this. This was January 2021. We probably would have seen it on the news, but that was when 768 people were storming the Capitol, so the news was a bit busy, I guess. Thanks. These sealed coffins were untouched for thousands of years. They went from finding 160 to finding 210. That's incredible. According to the ministry, the sarcophagi were completely closed and haven't been opened since they were buried at all. They opened a few though, of course, just to analyze and display them, but that's it. Yeah, leave the rest. I'm not focused on ancient curses or Brendan Fraser having to come out and save the day. Just let dead people lay where they are. Let them rest. The amount of effort gone into hiding and preserving their memory alone, I mean, look how long it's taken for us to even find these things. It's almost like they didn't want to be found. Number 3, the ancient curse. The walls of some of these tombs have warnings from the gods, which is a lot. One of them warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose. Also, if I walked into somebody's property now and it said trespassers' necks will be wrung out like a goose, I would turn back. I wouldn't want to investigate further. I would just walk away. You don't need to be an ancient god to get that message across, you know what I mean? But inside the found tomb of the vizier Ankhamor, a pharaoh's official from 4,000 years ago, a curse was written. Buried in a mastaba, an above-ground massive tomb, was this warning. Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property. It also warns of the vizier's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing a ghost. Yeah, there's that, or beware of dog. I don't know, you can pick which is more impactful on your property, sure. Number 2, the animal tombs. This tomb was found, as you may have guessed, in the Valley of the Kings. You're getting good, nice. But this one doesn't sound like the rest. I mean, for starters, it's a number rather than a name. What in the Elon Musk is happening here? Whose name was a number, huh? KV52 was discovered in 1906 by Edward Ayrton. Tomb KV50, KV51, and this one, KV52, they all form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Underneath 6 feet of debris, the entrance to these vaults were found, so when we enter this tomb, specifically KV52, that's been untouched, ideally for thousands of years, we can look forward to finding anything. In fact, whatever we do find, it's a win. It helps complete this age-long puzzle. So when officials opened KV52 and it was completely empty, well, that doesn't feel too nice. Something here is wrong. It was empty except for 2 boxes. Both were black and undecorated, which is odd considering what we've learned on this list. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a canopic chest that had 4 compartments in it. Hauntingly bare compared to what else we've seen on this list, but it gets a little better. We're not done yet. Finally, number 1, Queen Nefertiti's hidden chamber. When researchers are 90% sure about something, that's a pretty good sign. You only say you're 90% sure of something when you know for sure. You leave 10% in case anything else goes wrong out of your control, right? 90%, that's confident, we got this. So when Egyptian authorities said they're 90% sure there's a hidden chamber in King Tut's tomb, well, we got a little jazzed. Got some jazz hands going on. Not gold, jazz hands. Back in 2015, a paper was published on the burial of Queen Nefertiti. Archaeologist Nicholas Reeves argued that while conducting scans on the ancient site, Reeves found what resembled traces of doors beneath the plaster. Now, it's been considered previously by archaeologists that King Tut's mask, having ear piercings and all, suggests that at that time, that tomb and that death mask was actually meant for Queen Nefertiti, not King Tut. But because King Tut died suddenly when he was 19, plans had to quickly change.
Number 2, Ramses II with a vengeance. As some of you may know, Ramses II was the greatest of the rulers of the 19th dynasty and second longest reigning pharaoh ever. He lived to the age of 90, was an amazing warrior, leading the armies of Egypt by the age of 22, and has literal tons of statues of himself all over Egypt. He is also probably a lot of people's ancestor since he had 96 sons and 60 daughters, approximately. So yeah, It was kind of a big deal in 1881 when archaeologists discovered his mummy with a whole bunch of other ones in a secret chamber at Deir al-Bahri. Originally, Ramses was buried in the Valley of the Kings, as he should have been. But because of the risk of grave robbings, he was moved to a secret chamber. And then, after his discovery and stay at the museum in Cairo, he was moved again in the 70s, when he got a passport to travel to Paris. This guy gets around.
Number 9, Rosetta Stone. You are too fine to be laying down in bed alone. I can teach you my language, Rosetta Stone. Man, we all miss the old Drake. Girl, don't tempt me. Anyway, speaking of diamonds in the rough, the Rosetta Stone. Pretty shocking and important find. What is it? Well, basically it's a large stone tablet that has the same paragraph written on it in 3 separate languages. Why is this so important, you may ask? Well, it's basically helped us learn everything we know about ancient Egypt. More specifically, translating Egyptian to Greek and then to English. Or, since it was discovered by some of Napoleon's people and forces, it would have been in French. To put it in modern terms, it's as if you were back in grade 11 reading Shakespeare and not understanding a single word, but then the bully in school finds the cliff notes for Romeo and Juliet and decides to do a nice thing and share them with everybody. Yep, that makes sense. Good euphemism. That's a good one.
Number 8. Khufu's ship. When pharaohs passed on into the afterlife, they put a whole whack of stuff inside their tombs that were meant to come with them into the next plane of existence. It's why we see the mummified versions of their favorite cats and dogs, favorite foods, and tons of treasure. Unfortunately, after you're gone and buried, some opportunistic people are gonna bust down your tomb doors and steal all your stuff. I'd like to see those grave robbers steal what Khufu brought with him. In 1954, archaeologists found out that, among other things, Khufu had a 140-foot boat with his name on it, buried in pieces at the base of the Great Pyramid where he was entombed. It was almost perfectly intact, and after digging it out of the ground, they put it on display at the Solar Boat Museum, right next to where it was buried. Hopefully, that's close enough for Khufu to still use it in the afterlife.
Number 7, Mummy Workshop. Here's a recent discovery for you. Archaeologists in 2018 discovered a well-preserved embalming workshop complete with labeled oils. Ooh. What's an embalming workshop, you ask? Well, it's the place where kings go to shed a few pounds. Ooh. By that, I mean have their organs removed to be pickled in jars for the afterlife. My favorite part of this process is removing the brain. Cause, you don't need that. Lots of folks walk around without those all the time. Basically, you get a long hook surgical tool, and you find the good pink stuff up here through the nose. After stirring the pharaoh's memories like an Italian baker mixing bread dough, you flip the royal over and just let that all drain out until she's empty. I legitimately get queasy when talking about this stuff, that's not a joke, I seriously do. But you know what, I'm glad we found the place, and smarter people than I understand it. All I know is that if an Egyptian embalmer asks you to lick the spoon, you say no. Don't do it.
Number 6. Construction Manifest. You know, a lot of people include the Great Pyramids of Giza on their list of Egyptian discoveries. But like, how could you miss them? You know? What stumped people about the pyramids is how they were built. So for our next discovery, how about the discovery of a port in 2013 that had a piece of papyri? Isn't that so much more exciting than a massive 138-meter tall building? The piece of papyri actually was a sort of manifesto for those massive buildings. It basically said the limestone used in the Great Pyramid was shipped from a quarry at Tura to Giza along the Nile River. It also said that it took 4 days, and it talked a little bit about how long Khufu was in charge of Egypt and the guy who was in charge of building the pyramids. See, it's very exciting.
Number 5, can't take it with you. In life, you live and then you pass on. If you believe in the home sense signs your mom hangs up in her kitchen, then there's gonna be a lot of living, laughing, and loving with that. Ancient Egyptians believed in taking things with them to the afterlife. Yeah, pretty much everything was coming with them. Gold, treasure, organs, except the brain, and pretty much just anything you would need for that kind of adventure. Well, animals were no different. Oftentimes when discovering tombs of kings in the main chamber, or sometimes in their own, were statues of cats and dogs, and naturally, mummified kitties and doggies. Now, I love my pets just as much as the next guy, but a discovery in 2019 revealed a tomb with statues, mummies, and even some preserved crocodiles. Ooh, weird. That's a weird pet.
Number 4. Tomb KV5. Sometimes you pass things off without giving them the proper time and attention. Like The fact that your middle toe on one of your feet is a little longer than the same one on the other side, and you're like, it's probably fine, but it's actually a mutation that all of your ancestors had, and it's the reason you can walk faster than everyone else. Not that that's happened to me or anything, but the archaeologists of tomb KV5 know what I'm talking about, sorta. Basically, KV5 was not studied very well, and in 1995 it turns out that it was actually one of the largest tombs ever created in the Valley of the Kings. So far, we have found around 121 chambers and corridors, and we think there will be 150 total. The tomb was used for the sons of Ramses II, who, as we know, had over 100 kids, so the size of the tomb kinda checks out. So far, we've only confirmed 6, but there are likely to be around 20 of his sons down there.
Number 3, the Pyramids of Giza.
A lot of people include the Great Pyramids of Giza on their list of Egyptian discoveries, but like, how could you miss them?
Okay, obviously people can see these bad boys from miles away. It would be kind of hard to lose something like that, as Adam said, but then again, as a man, I take pride in losing my car keys every time I need to use them. But more specifically, it was the discovery of the inner chambers of the pyramids that really kicked off archaeology. The verdict? Well, these pyramids not only hold riches of historical knowledge, but the engineering involved is out of this world, which, is kind of how some people think they were constructed today. The complexity in craftsmanship still has people scratching their heads. As for me, I believe that with enough careful planning and engineering, mixed in with a whole heap of forced labor, you can just get about anything done. There's still much to be learned about these giants in the desert. Ooh.
Number 2, Aten. Even today, we are still making huge discoveries in Egypt. I mean, maybe not specifically today, April 27th, or whenever you watch this, but in this day and age. In 2020, we discovered a 3,000-year-old city buried in the sand, and it's probably the biggest discovery since our #1 spot. The city named Aten, or the Rise of Aten, is the largest city of its kind that we have found and gives us a really good look at life during Egypt's most profitable era. That would be the rule of Amenhotep III. Amenhotep IV is his son, who would drastically change the country's direction. Following his father's death, the fourth changed his name to Akhenaten, abandoned the old Egyptian gods besides the sun god Aten, and moved the royal seat from Thebes to the new city of Akhetaten, which is known as Amarna. He was a weird one, but this city wasn't weird. It was impressive, with an administration area as well as residential districts, production area where mud bricks, amulets, and other goods for buildings and temples were made, along with a bakery. Yeah, I love my croissants covered in sand too.
Number 1, King Tut, the man, the myth, the legend. Besides the pyramids, the sand, and the hot sun, nothing is more famous out of Egypt than King Tut. Well, why is this? Is he not just another royal bro who's just big chilling in his tomb? Yeah, sort of, but his tomb is very unique actually. Unfortunately for Egyptians and archaeologists alike, a lot of the tombs have been cleaned out by grave robbers and crooks, some of which are just long gone. The stuff could have been heisted at any point really, we're just not sure. King Tut's tomb, however, was pretty well untouched, and because of this, we got the chance to learn about a king who really didn't do too much. I think his sarcophagus stands out the most, the gold and the blue. It's beautiful, I love it, it's good aesthetic.
Kicking off our list at number 10, Israel Cursed Tomb. Here we go, right off the hop. A secret tomb was discovered in Israel only a month ago. Now this is the first time a tomb has been found at the UNESCO World Heritage Site in 65 years. Now the actual cave itself was discovered only a year ago, but these smaller chambers are being found recently, as like a month ago recently. And the tomb found came along with a message. Awesome, we love those. It vows to curse anybody who would open the grave, and this message is also written in blood red, so yeah. Can we not open this one, maybe? Last time we had a black sarcophagus in Egypt, people were sticking their heads in for no reason, just to see what's up. And then, a plague happened. So, number 9, Polish King Curse. Some of you may remember this, or your parents might so ask them about this at dinner. Yeah, make it weird tonight. Ask them about a Polish king curse tonight while you're eating food. Back in 1973, a team of archaeologists were jazzed when they uncovered an ancient 15th century tomb. The tomb of the Polish king at the time, King Casimir IV Jagiellon. Now media was of course all over this discovery, as they should be, it was exciting. Now everyone was of course making jokes about a curse. You kinda have to, right? We're all thinking about it. What if there's a curse? I don't know. open it though. Still, some team members involved ended up dying after the discovery. It was a little odd. There were a few who said it was due to a curse, but the sudden illnesses were in fact caused by deadly fungi inside the tomb. So it still was the tomb's fault, but it wasn't a curse per se. It was breathed in, and that's what led to these researchers' untimely death. Number 8. King Tut's curse. Here we go. Since we're on the topic of illnesses or curses, let's go back 50 more years, shall we? To the legendary discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922. This discovery is what made everyone, so paranoid when that Polish king curse came out, right? This discovery and what followed is the main reason we believe in mummy curses today. One member of the expedition, George Herbert, passed away suddenly 6 weeks after they opened King Tut's chamber. It was not toxic mold, it wasn't a curse, but rather it was a mosquito bite on the cheek. He got blood poisoning from a mosquito bite, that's all it was. I mean, I'm sure digging up bodies from the past and opening the tombs up doesn't help karma in general, but it wasn't a curse written in red. Not this time. Number 7. A strange resting place. Ancient burial grounds. Okay, these tombs, they come in many different shapes and sizes. Some can be these massive Great Pyramids, and others can be a shallow cave system. Sometimes there's ancient history right below your feet, and you'd never know. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground. And judging from the skull and the bones and the placement, something was afoot here. It had clearly been hunted down by humans and placed there purposefully. That's not the mysterious part at all. The mysterious part is that all the bones have been carefully separated and there's no marks to suggest that any tools were used. So researchers believe that this thing wasn't even used for food. So what was it? The limbs were placed to point north and south. That's it. They used this donkey as a compass. How rude is that? What? Donkeys in that area of Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre at all. But the way the bones were buried, north and south, that's very odd. That's very Game of Thronesy. Know what I'm saying? What's the message here? What's the point? What's the point? Besides north and south, of course. Number 6. Tortoise tomb. Okay, somebody called Mario. We got a lot of shells to explain. Okay, pal? Back in 2005 in northern Israel, a tomb of a shaman, who we believe was a 45-year-old woman at the time of her passing, was found in a cave. It was a cave/tomb. Like I said, many different shapes and sizes. There were 28 other skeletons as well, and it appears they had a 6-stage burial. There were beautiful decorations to suggest such, but something that really stood out here were the 86 tortoise bodies discovered in the corner of the tomb. What was going on here? What did we miss? I have FOMO, but I'm not sure why. Was this an ancient feast or a long-lost sacrifice? Either way, poor guys. Number 5. The sitting man. Okay, of all the tombs to find, this one would be the most horrifying. This would be so jarring to stumble across, okay? Buckle up. Back in 2005, researchers found a Mayan tomb in Honduras from the 5th century, okay? It's a long time ago. And the body inside was not lying down. It wasn't a pile of bones pointing east or west this time. Rather, it was in a chair, sitting up, like a villain from Zelda. How scary would that be? I mean, it's beautiful, but that's jarring to stumble across. You know what I mean? Whoever was the first person to look and see that, brave soul, that's all I'm saying. The body found, it appears to be an elite member of the Mayan Empire. He passed away, we think, around 650 AD. Yeah, the guy gets propped up in a chair. That's awesome. His legs were crossed and he was rocking jade jewelry. This was very royal. And the tomb itself was actually upright as well. It's common fear to be buried alive, but in this case, you'd have plenty of room. You'd be like, oh, we're good. These types of tombs are actually quite rare to find, but the fact that this one is also in great condition and there's somebody sitting cross-legged inside, double rare. Here we go. Number 4. The Terracotta Army. This is, talk about curses. Oh boy. The tomb of Emperor Qi Shi Huang, China's first emperor. Okay, in this tomb, we can find 8,000 statues. This one is quite loaded. I almost made this number 1 just out of principle. But they all have unique carvings on their face, as if to suggest these are all custom statues, all representing an individual from that long ago. All 8,000 of them. The emperor believed that after he had passed away, he would have the spirits of his enemies to face, so he wanted to be prepared even after death. The emperor decided to close the tomb before the workers even had a chance to get out. It was horrible. He was worried his enemies had found out, so there's of course lots of statues down there and a lot of dark history, just all piled into one. I would never go near this. I think the Mummy 3 is about this tomb. It didn't do so well, but yeah. Scary concept. Number 3. Message from Egyptian afterlife. We're all curious what happens after you die, of course, but nobody celebrated the end of your days like ancient Egyptians did, right? It's beautiful. Like I've mentioned before on this channel, they would have these fake painted doors. They would leave valuables. Any new tomb that we discover provides more hints as to what lies beyond, right? An ancient necropolis was discovered only a few years ago, again in Egypt. It contains dozens of coffins and a necklace that holds a message from the afterlife. Okay, now we're talking. This site is around 2,000 years old, and they're in the process of excavating it as we speak, as I mansplain to you about these tombs. But so far the tombs and artifacts found, officials think, belong to an ancient priestess. A message from the afterlife is pretty spectacular, but what does it say exactly? Well, we're still waiting to find out. These things take time, you know? Number 2, mythical carvings. Back in 2014, a 1700-year-old cemetery was discovered along the Silk Road, which are these ancient highways connecting China and the Roman Empire. Now in the city of Kucha, now in northwest China, the cemetery was found along with 10 ancient tombs, one of which was referred to as M3. M3 didn't have any haunting messages this time around, but it did contain several carvings of mythical creatures. Creatures that were once alive? Question mark. There's the white tiger of the west, the black turtle of the north, the vermilion bird of the south, so far so lovely, and then there's the azure dragon of the east. A little bigger, a little bit more mighty. These mythical carvings represent different seasons and the heavens, but could the other 6 carvings mean depictions of hell? Probably, possibly. And finally, number 1, the Ring of Sekianis. One ring to rule them all. And by rule, I mean curse you and your entire family. Don't touch this. This is why you don't steal from ancient tombs. Has to be number 1. This 12-gram gold ring, for starters, looks beautiful, and secondly, it's massive. Its diameter was 25 millimeters, so unless you were wearing some sort of infinity gauntlet, she's probably gonna fall off your little Jack Skellington fingers, you know what I mean? The ring had first been found in 1785. A farmer was plowing a field in Silchester Village, a village west of London known for its grim history, because in 45 AD, ancient Romans invaded that site, and come the 7th century, it was completely abandoned. And probably pretty cursed. The ring was mighty and even had an inscription on it, a Latin inscription, of course. It read, Senequian vivas indium. And when 1929 rolled around, new details surfaced, or resurfaced rather. The data from the ring matched an excavation that was done in the early 1900s less than 100 miles away, in a place called Lydney. That's where this ring is from. At the same site, however, a tablet was found recalling the Celtic god of healing and hunting, and how his favorite ring got stolen. I'm connecting some stories here. Uh-oh, I may have stolen something I shouldn't have. If this rings a bell, yes, Lord of the Rings was inspired by this exact legend. The tablet also says, may he who bears the name of Senequianus not have health until he brings the ring back to the Temple of Nodens. Yeah, let's get that ring back ASAP Rocky, that would be great. I'll be a lot quicker than Lord of the Rings. I'll be a lot quicker than 3 movies, I'll tell you that. Where's this temple? I'll put in my Uber right now, I'm on my way. Kicking off the list at number 10, got a passport. Ramses II is known as one of the greatest ancient Egyptian rulers of all time. He was called Ramses the Great, so that's a good sign already. At a young age, he fought in harsh battles to protect the borders of Egypt, and during his reign, the Egyptian army reached 100,000 men. That's a pretty large army. He was later referred to as the Great Ancestor, and it didn't take long for Ramses II to declare himself a god. It's always fun being like, hey, by the way, I'm a god now. That's how cool I am. 30 years into his ruling, Ramses was ritually turned into an Egyptian god. It was a formal thing. Though it wasn't until 3,000 years later until Ramses would truly soar through the skies. He was buried in his treasure after 96 years of living, and in 1974 he finally started to show signs of aging. Not too bad. He went from being on display to being sent to Paris to get a glow up, to preserve the king's body even longer. Instead of being listed as luggage on the way to Paris, the pharaoh was given an official Egyptian passport for the commute. The government gave a mummy a passport. This is like the first 5 minutes of a horror film. Under occupation, it even said king. And there was even a small disclaimer noting that he was in fact still dead. You can never be too sure, Number 9. Baboon tattoos. Ancient Egyptians worshipped animals. This is common knowledge now at this point. We've heard about their love towards cats, which I'll explain later on, but what about baboons? Yeah, they were pretty important pieces to this ancient puzzle as well. Some mummies were found with tattoos of baboons on their bodies. Now, one of the most strange things that pharaohs did back in ancient Egyptian days was train baboons to make arrests. Imagine stealing a pair for your family and then 4 baboons start doing parkour chasing you down. That's so alarming. I would just throw it and be like, please stop. You're so scary and strong. They trained baboons to pick fruit, they trained them to make beer, and they also trained them to entertain. Yeah, these baboons were the life of the party. Their dance moves alone would be reason enough to tattoo one on my arm. So you know what? I get it. Get a Harambe tattoo. I'm like, I see it. I see the similarities. Number 8. Worship dung beetles. So worshipping a baboon that dances and makes holiday ales, yeah, I can see how one would worship such a creature, that makes sense. But pharaohs also worship dung beetles, and their reasoning may surprise you. Dung beetles, also known as scarabs, are the only species in the entire world that follows the Milky Way naturally. Animals are born with natural instincts. Sea turtles race to the sea, these guys follow the cosmos. It's pretty wild. It's one thing to follow the sun naturally because it gives off warmth. Sunflowers will literally turn their head to find the sun, which is super creepy, but it's beautiful. These insects would follow the line of the Milky Way and then roll their poop towards it. They'd be like, hello Milky Way, and they just... Hieroglyphs of these beetles are seen all over. Like near the sacred lake at the Temple of Karnak, for example, there's a massive scarab monument. And today, if you walk around it 9 times, you get good luck. And don't worry, you don't have to roll any droppings at the same time. Don't get dizzy, that's all, it's the only rule. The scarab is there to represent the god Khepri, which ancient Egyptians believed was the sun. I grew up thinking the sun was a baby, but that's because I watched Teletubbies, so, you know, depends. Number 7, surprise each other. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar were a pretty beneficial couple, to say the least. Cleopatra would use Caesar's armies, which in turn would allow her to rule Egypt, while Caesar was eyeing down Cleopatra's extreme wealth. They were the perfect pair. She was able to financially support Caesar enough for him to return to power back in Rome, but how did such a perfect pair meet in the first place? Did Cleopatra swipe right? No. Well, a then 52-year-old Julius Caesar visited the much younger Cleopatra, so she then sent a surprise gift to his chambers. She got her crew to roll her up in a carpet or bed sheets, it's not really confirmed, something along those lines, and then delivered her to his door completely nude. He unraveled a naked Cleopatra and he's like, okay, hello. That's pretty impressive. Cleopatra was down for fun surprises. While we don't recommend this as an approach ever, it's one worth mentioning on our list. Number 6, gender reveal parties. We've all seen those videos. A guy goes to hit a baseball, he misses it, the baseball breaks and there's pink dust all around his feet and he starts crying. It's wonderful. Gender reveal parties were quite popular, you know, until they started lighting wildfires. But back in the day, Egyptians had a pretty interesting method for predicting the gender of a newborn. Instead of peeing on a pregnancy test, you would have to use wheat and barley seeds instead. Depending on how those barley crops grew, they could accurately predict the sex of the child. They were right 85% of the time, which is quite impressive back in the day. We went from watering crops to burning them. Hashtag, it's a boy. Number 5, space knife. Only a few years after King Tut's tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings, archaeologist Howard Carter found 2 daggers that were buried with the king. Now, like I mentioned earlier, it's not uncommon to be buried with your treasure or belongings. It's why ancient Egyptians would build these tombs in a certain way, so grave robbers can't just sneak in after you pass away and then take all of your goodies. So 2 daggers were found with King Tut, one made of iron and the other with gold. Now, with iron being more rare than gold during the Bronze Age, this was quite a big deal. With recent advancements in technology, we're able to use a technique called portable X-ray fluorescent spectrometry, and according to the journal Meteorites and Planetary Science, the blade is actually made of iron, nickel, and cobalt, suggesting that its material is that of extraterrestrial origin. A blade fell from the sky and now a king has it. That's pretty insane. Also, aliens? Just saying. Number 4, KV55. Also located in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, Tomb 55, otherwise known as KV55, was found by Edward Arton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb, and the reason that we call this tomb by a number rather than a name is because we really don't know for sure who's inside. Even the walls of the tombs inside, they aren't covered with beautiful hieroglyphs to tip us off on their history or their ruling, it's just bare. The only hint as to who is buried remains on the walls. It's one hieroglyph that remains, and it was discovered also in 1907, and it translates simply to, "The evil one shall not live again." That's very scary. That's definitely scarier than Greg was here. I don't know. Even massive stones were built and set up in order to prevent anything from getting out, whereas usually with ancient tombs it's the opposite, so that's pretty scary. The description for those inside the tomb has also been destroyed, so we have really no idea who's in KV55. Or what. Number 3, ancient Photoshop. When we look back at ancient artwork, we see these kings and queens and they look athletic. They look to be in great shape, when in reality, these pharaohs were probably quite obese. I mean, think about it. If you slam wine and bread all day and you have baboons dancing around, plus a little dab of honey every, 8 minutes, yeah, you're gonna gain some weight. Many of these ancient pharaohs had diabetes. And Queen Hatshepsut, who was alive during the 15th century BC, her sarcophagus shows her as slim and strong, but historians all agree that she was out of shape and extremely unhealthy. Honestly, I would do the exact same if I was there back then. She was ahead of her time. If somebody made a statue for me, I'd be like, yeah, give it an 8-pack, make him extremely jacked and 7'2". Can we do that? Sure, no one's gonna ask questions. I'm Dwayne The Rock Johnston, just write it down, please. Number 2, worshipped cats. I am allergic to cats, but I still love them. I still pet them. I ruin my entire night just to get my face right there next to their cute little furry face. But ancient Egyptians, like I said earlier, really loved cats. They respected them, they worshipped them. Even though at the time dogs were respected for being hunters, cats were still considered magical creatures. So if there's ever a cat versus dog argument going on your end of the screen, cats win. I'm allergic and I'm still saying cats win. That's huge. If you had a cat, it means you had good luck. When cats passed away, they too were mummified back in the day. You would think that alone was plenty of respect, but ancient Egyptians and pharaohs went a step further. After their cat died, they would shave their eyebrows off and then mourn until they grew back. That's like 3.5 months of cat depression. That's wild. Next time your friend tells you that their cat passed away, tell them that if they really love them, they'll shave their eyebrows off and then see what they say. Also, you don't have to make your friends shave their eyebrows. Let's leave this one in the past. That's fun. Just be sad with eyebrows. Be like, Number 1, fight a hippo. Egypt's first pharaoh, Menes, although we know next to nothing about his history, there is something there that has historians scratching their heads to this day. At his early time, the pharaoh was setting out to unite all of Egypt under his rule. The time that he ruled as well is considered a rather peaceful time when comparing it to years later. We know that he was well respected, and we also know that after his 63 years of peaceful ruling, he was stomped to death by a hippo. That's horrible. It's a horrible way to go out. He was an elderly ruler at that time. He was surrounded by guards, and somehow a hippo got all the way to his chambers. A hippo, and then ended the pharaoh's life. Some suggest that the reason there's nothing written about this pharaoh's tragic, horrible demise is because it's possible that the hippo was his pet. This is why you don't try and tame a beast as a pet. Perhaps this was an early similar situation as the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack. Just stick to smaller magical cats. They're much safer. They won't stomp you to death. Oh my god, it's horrible.
Number 10. Gold tongues. 140 miles south of Cairo is El Banasa. Archaeologists just found 2 sealed tombs containing the remains of a mystery man and a mystery woman, and an array of clues and, of course, treasures. The sealed tomb and sarcophagi, made of limestone, included scarab amulets, 4 canopic mummy jars, and more than 400 pieces of pottery and funerary figurines. Yeah, like little guys. The mummy's face was also so well preserved with a perfectly shiny golden tongue still inside his mouth. Ooh, ouch. They just like dip that in, or they cut that off and kind of replace it. How's that work? Guy's gonna have a hard time with his L's. The team stumbled upon 3 golden tongues actually, and archaeologists working in the Alexandria also discovered gold tongue mummies dating to about 2,000 years ago. Talk about an expensive sentence, huh? Number 9, ginger. As always, if you like what we do here on Bumblebee, throw us a like button, why don't you? Or comment down below. Which one of these creep you out the most? The golden tongues? Dude, it's already got me. The Gibellian pre-dynastic mummies are 6 naturally mummified bodies dating to approximately 3400 BCE, or from the late pre-dynastic period of ancient Egypt. Since 1901, the first body excavated has remained on display in the British Museum. The body, of course, was originally nicknamed Ginger due to its very well-preserved, healthy, shiny red hair. This nickname is no longer officially used, of course, because these are people we're talking about here. After the Human Tissue Act of 2004, the British Museum developed policies for proper treatment of human remains and no longer used nicknames. Yeah, that would have been nice, wouldn't it? Just finding bones making jokes. Yes, look, Limbs McGee. I'll write that down. I'll write that down, and here is the official. These 6 were excavated at the end of the 19th century by Wallace Budge and are the first complete, fully intact pre-dynastic bodies ever discovered to this day. Spooky. Number 8. King Tut. We can't just blow by this list without the scariest event of all. The tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered in 1922 in the Valley of the Kings, led by Egyptologist Howard Carter. Tut's tomb was hidden by debris, luckily, therefore it never got looted throughout the centuries. More than 5,000 objects were found, including the infamous King Tut himself. Egypt, now part of the British rule, gave a feeling of national pride back then, strengthening pharaohism and gluing Egypt's ties to this now ancient world. The publicity surrounding the excavation intensified when one of the founders actually died of an infection, giving rise to the infamous cursed tomb. But then a couple of other discoverers just started dropping dead and everyone was like, oh yeah, so that's what cursed means, huh? It says do not open right here. I see that now. Gotcha. Number 7. John Wilkes Booth. Okay, so mummies are usually tied with Egyptian ritual and historical burial purposes, but it wasn't just them though. It's pretty common to preserve a body. John Wilkes Booth was famous for a couple of things. First off, he was one of the world's greatest actors, a true thespian, and of course, a prolific American presidential assassin. Yeah, he shot Lincoln. So apparently he escaped the manhunt, which then apparently toured the US as a mummified version of himself. Wait, what? In 1903, a drifter named David E. George locked himself in a hotel, taking his own life by ingesting a lethal amount of arsenic. According to the news report, George made a confession. I am not David E. George. I am the one who killed the best man that ever lived. I am John Wilkes Booth. The embalmed body was soon fought over, and beginning in 1937 and continuing all the way into the 1950s, the mummy was part of Jay Gould's $1 Million Circus. Yeah, traveling with elephants, acrobats, and high dive dog acts all around the world. According to a PBS report, the mummy itself was actually last seen in the 1970s and maybe in the hands of a private collector. Dude, people are sick. They'll buy and sell literally anything for money and clout. Like, I don't get it, dude. Just like buy and sell Pokemon cards or something, you know? Number 6. Nicostratus. A large unknown Greco-Roman tomb was just found this year and excavated in Aswan in South Egypt. An Egyptian-Italian mission led by Patrizia Piacentini, professor of Egyptology and archaeology at the University of Milan. What makes this discovery so cool is the mummies that were discovered. This massive Romanized tomb located in the Aga Khan Mausoleum found archaeological treasures including offering tables, stone panels littered in hieroglyphics, and one large beautiful copper necklace engraved in Greek scripture with the name Nicostratus on it. The room is overlooked by 4 burial chambers dug deep into the rock where a beautiful terracotta sarcophagus lay. The architecture alone is puzzling, let alone these mysterious high-order young adults that were mummified here. Early studies have indicated so far that the grave includes bodies from more than one family, so the mystery question: who was this Nicostratus? Who was he? And who are these unrelated followers that followed him? Number 5. Tattoos. Okay, so who was the first? We see them everywhere. I don't have any myself, but every which way you look, somebody's tatted head to toe. So who was the first one? Well, a mummy known as the Gobelin Man A pushes evidence back about 1,000 years. The oldest tattoos were once thought to belong to a South American Chinchorro mummy who had a mustache tattooed onto his face. It was initially thought that he was the oldest specimen of ink. Then, an ancient princess was found in Siberia. She holds one of the most well-preserved tattoos ever found on a body. Princess Ukok, a Scythian ruler who sadly died of breast cancer around 3,000 years ago. Her body was inked up so heavily and she was buried next to 6 horses, indicating that she was of high royalty. But in 1991, the oldest mummy ever found still holds the Guinness World Record for the oldest tats. Like 5,000 years old. Otzi the Iceman reps 61 tattoos over his entire body, mostly lines that researchers think was either medicinal or therapeutic. Several needles were tied together and the skin was pricked stick and poke style with ink made from wood smoke and milk. Mix them together, rub them all over the wounds, and voila, Travis Barker. Number 4. The Lady of Cow. Speaking of being tatted head to toe for reasons we're still unsure of, the Lady of Cow. She was discovered in 2006 by a team of Peruvian archaeologists in the El Brujo Archaeological Complex in northern Peru, led by Regulo Franco Jordan, one of the National Cultural Institute of Peru. The mummy, which is heavily tattooed head to toe and wrapped in many layers of cloth, was found with a ton of ceremonial items: pottery, weapons, and jewelry. The remains of a second young woman were found as well, and researchers think it could have been a sacrifice, signifying this woman was a ruler of many. Modern autopsy reveals that they were in their mid-20s and died of complications due to pregnancy. They think she died somewhere around 450 BCE, and until they found her, researchers were almost certain that only men held high standing in their culture and power, and that women of this status should never have existed. Well, rewrite them, boys, because Beyonce said it. Who run the world? Girls. Boom. Right there. Evidence, sacrifice, tattoos. Come on. Number 3. Killer Crocs. In 1899, archaeologists funded by the University of California benefactor Phoebe A. Hearst found hundreds of crocodile mummies on an expedition to northern Egypt. 19 mummified crocodiles are part of the Egyptian collection at the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology at UC Berkeley. These things were a constant threat to ancient Egyptians, and there were a lot of them. Some tomb walls are even decorated head to toe with scenes that show herdsmen performing magical spells to ward off crocodiles before they crossed the Nile on wooden boats. It was such a big problem every August when the Nile would flood that there were croc priests who would spend all day mummifying and offering them to the gods. Apparently, the Dutch National Museum of Antiques unwrapped and scanned a 3,000-year-old croc mummy, which were actually 50 little crocodiles positioned in a way to make it look like a giant croc. Like a croc within a croc. And not just them too. The cat-faced goddess Bastet would receive mummified cats, while baboons were offered to Thoth, the god of wisdom. Animal mummification was so popular that it became a thriving industry. In one catacomb complex, Egyptologists think there could be as many as 70 million mummified animals crammed into like 30 small rooms. Different times, man, different times. Number 2. Chinchorro mummies. On the sandy dunes of the Atacama Desert, the Chilean port city of Arica, bordering Peru, was home to the Chinchorro people. In July, the United Nations Cultural Organization, UNESCO, added hundreds of well-preserved mummies to its World Heritage List. The Chinchorro mummies. First documented in 1917 by German archaeologist Max Uhl, who had found some of the preserved bodies actually on a beach. Radiocarbon dating eventually showed that the mummies were more than 7,000 years old, more than 2 millennia older than the more widely known Egyptian mummies. The earliest one, the Achaemenid, dates to 7020 BCE. They discovered their process of 3 stages. The black technique was to take the deceased person's body apart, limb by limb, treating it and then reassembling it all in like a Mr. Potato Head style. Then, the red technique, which made incisions above the shoulders to remove all internal organs and dry the body out. And finally, the mud coat. Basically, caking the body in a mixture of clay and gypsum in a last coat seal. Then they'd wrap you up. And using sticks to mold and hold a cast of a person's shape, this process was, well, this. Researchers think that Egyptians were like, oh, that's how you do it. I see what the, okay, perfect. I'm just gonna go over there and do that. And number 1, Saqqara mummies. In 2019, just 20 miles south of Cairo on the Nile's west bank, there lays a field mixed of sand and earth that make up the ancient site of Saqqara. It's the oldest building known to humans. Like old. Older than the 3 pyramids. And with that comes a new archaeological discovery. This year, archaeologists just discovered the largest loot of ancient Egypt ever. Better than Tut's tomb. 150 bronze statues, 250 coffins with mummies in them that date back 3,000 years. Saqqara is Egypt's richest archaeological site. Home to the 4,700-year-old Step Pyramid, Egypt's oldest, the site was used as a burial ground. Geophysical surveys have revealed the remains of numerous temples buried under the sand, in which we have discovered only a quarter of the actual site. Millions of animal mummies like dogs, cats, cobras, and crocs, even 2 lion cubs were found mummified. The work site is 500 yards long, and the archaeologists working there have only carried out the first 100 yards of digging. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I can't wait to see like what next year holds. Like, get some more bulldozers going, you know? Saqqara, Göbekli Tepe, Peru? More scans, more scans! So interesting, but also very terrifying. Number 10. Kui. A very preserved body of a high-ranking nobleman called Kui was discovered in 2019 in quite a lavish tomb in the necropolis of Saqqara. This is a lot older than we originally thought, too. To date, it's now one of the oldest Egyptian mummies ever discovered. Dated to the Old Kingdom, aka the trial and error period of the mummification process. But after finding Kui, we gotta rewrite some stuff. Techniques some 4,000 years ago, 1,000 years before they thought this process was even mastered. I'm talking fine linens, quality resin, and of course, a full mummification process. This wasn't thought to have been used for at least like another 999 years. Salima Ikram, head of Egyptology at the American University in Cairo, said, quote, "Books about mummification and the history of the Old Kingdom will all need to be revised." Sounds like the first 4 minutes to a banger Nicolas Cage movie to me, doesn't it? Number 9. Ramses II. As always, if you dig what we do here, make sure to Hulk smash that like button or leave us a comment down below. Ramses II, aka Ramses the Great, the 3rd pharaoh of the 19th dynasty and considered one of the greatest ever. And talk about fragile shipping, his mummy was moved a ton of times. Due to looting, of course, not recently either. It's written all over his linens, actually. Moved here, then moved here. Finally, had to move again here. Originally buried in the Valley of the Kings, but was then moved by priests to the tomb of Queen Nefertiti. Then moved again 3 days later to another tomb. People wanted him, or wanted what was on him. In 2019, Egyptologists unearthed a ka related to Ramses II. A ka is basically a carved statue that would allow the soul to have a place or vehicle on Earth to just sit and chill in. It's only the second ka ever found. This discovery is considered one of the rarest archaeological discoveries ever from Egyptologists. Yeah, write that down. Important stuff. Number 8. Egtved Girl. In 1921, just outside Egtved, Denmark, a Nordic bronze naturally preserved woman was discovered inside a handcrafted oak tree trunk coffin. Her burial has been dated by dendrochronology to 1370 BCE. She was wearing 2 bronze bracelets, a wool skirt, shirt, and belt, and a large disc plate decorated with spirals and a spike. At her feet, the cremated remains of a young one, unfortunately. By her head, a small birch bark box that contained an awl to puncture holes, various pins, and a boned carved hair comb. And of course, a big bucket of beer. Skull! But who exactly was the Egtved woman? It remains a mystery. Number 7. Lady Rye. Discovered and unwrapped by Grafton Elliott Smith in 1909, the distinguished mummy perfectly wrapped was apparently an ancient Egyptian woman of the 18th dynasty who served as nursemaid to Queen Nefertiti, the most perfect example of embalming that has come down to us from the time of the early 18th dynasty, or perhaps even any period. Now sitting in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, this mid-30s woman is still a pretty big mystery. Her mummified remains were discovered in a Theban tomb, and scientists revealed in 2009 using a CAT scan, Lady Rye had a diseased aortic arch and is thus the oldest known mummy with evidence of atherosclerosis. They think that she died around 1530 BCE. The mummy of Ahmose Inipi, a princess of queen of the late 17th dynasty and also aunt to Ahmose Nefertiti, was found in the outer coffin of Lady Rye, so scientists are sure that she was highly respected, but we got DNA analytics from thousands of years ago, so who knows. Number 6. The Tashwanat Mummy. During an excavation in 1950 under a rock shelf in Libya, under the scorching sun of the Sahara Desert, scientists think they might have found the world's oldest mummy. Just east of Egypt is a site called Wahamagyag. A small mummified body was found under 5,000-year-old sands, wrapped beneath 5,000-year-old leaves inside an insulated antelope skin sack, perfectly mummified. The ancient site was first excavated in the late 1940s, and the small, perfectly preserved Tashwanat mummy is unearthed by the help of University of Rome professor Fabrizio Mori, and it was found 1,500 miles west of the Nile. Using radiocarbon dating, the mummy was thought to be between 5,400 and 5,600 years old, which makes it much older than any of the mummies found over in ancient Egypt. It was believed that the makers of the mummy were cattle herders and occupied North Africa at the time when the Sahara was a savanna. The mummy now resides in Tripoli, Libya. So cattle farmers knew how to embalm and perfectly preserve for 5,000 years. That's what you're telling me here. Number 5. Princess of Zhao. The River Princess, aka the Beauty of Zhao, was found in 2003 by archaeologists with the Zhao University studying Ordex Necropolis, a small river cemetery number 5, Xinjiang, Western China. She's also known as M11, not because she was a spy with James Bond, but for the tomb that she was found in. She was buried and preserved almost 4,000 years ago. Very well preserved, with clothes, hair, and even eyelashes still intact. She's only named princess due to her amazingly preserved body, not because she was an actual ruler or anything. Archaeologists think that because of the dry, salty conditions of the desert and her tightly sealed boat coffin made of cowhide, it had something to do with the almost flawless process. Cowhide dries out, it shrinks, sealing the coffin airtight. She wasn't embalmed before her death, remember, but mummified naturally due to the climate and method. A happy accident, I guess. A 2014 study revealed that it was now part of the oldest preserved cheese we'd ever find. Yep, a little last-minute snack or a little offering to the gods. Both good. Number 4. Shinzue. The Marquise of Dai, aka Lady Dai, not that Lady Dai, but this Lady Dai, was a Chinese noblewoman and wife to Li Kang, a chancellor of the Western Han dynasty. Her mummified body was found buried deep within a hillside in south-central China in 1972 by workers digging on an air raid shelter. The room is absolutely filled to the brim with objects that defined her life. Exquisite jewelry, dresses, slippers, beauty products, and even containers of her favorite food. Little Tupperware snack there. A lavish life. Kardashian-like wealth. Her body was found within 4 rectangle tombs that sat inside each other, then buried deep under layers of charcoal and white clay. A coffin within a coffin. Then wrapped up in more than 20 layers of cloth and bound with silk ribbon and placed inside an airtight coffin. The chamber was then buried deep underground to ensure cool, dry places for the body to rest. She's so well preserved, scientists in 2003 developed a secret compound that was actually injected into her still existing veins to assure further preservation. Yeah, that's not scary at all. Just inject a 3,000-year-old mummy with a secret vial. Yeah. I've seen Captain America, I know where this is going. Number 3. Talund Man. The Talund Man is a naturally mummified corpse which at first people thought was just a deceased old man, slowly decaying days after his demise. A man from the Scandinavia pre-Roman Iron Age actually. 5th century BCE we're talking. Long time ago. He was found in 1950 by Viggo and Emil Hojard while working on the land, preserved as a quote, bog body near the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark. The cause of death has been determined as hanging. Scholars believe that the man was actually a human sacrifice rather than an executed criminal because of the arranged position of his body and eyes and mouth, them being closed and all. His body was arranged in a fetal position, wearing a pointed sheepskin hat and a hide belt around his waist. Additionally, the noose made of animal hide was found beside his naked body. Radiocarbon dating indicate that he died circa 500 BCE. In 1987, the Silkeborg Museum reconstructed the body using the skeletal remains where it's on display today. Yeah, it's old. Like wrinkles and all. Number 2. The Lovers of Modena. The Lovers of Modena are a pair of human skeletons well preserved underground and discovered in 2009 by archaeologists in Modena, Italy. The 2 skeletons were buried with their hands interlocked and are believed to have been buried between the 4th and 6th century BCE. Originally it was assumed that the 2 were composed of a male and a female, due to the other specimens and examples that they had found in the region. The discovery of the 2 buried hand in hand or embracing mummies aren't uncommon though. The Lovers of Valdero, buried over 6,000 years ago, were buried just north in Italy, but male and female. So when archaeologists discovered the fossilized pair in the mud of Modena, they assumed lovers since they were both positioned with their heads staring at each other. Pretty common. After DNA analysis of enamel peptides on their teeth by the University of Bologna, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to 2 males. Regardless of the nature of the relationship, the Modena skeletons offer a unique representation of the love, bond, brotherhood, or commitment between these 2 men during the late Italian antiquity period. This is like the original Romeo and Juliet. In love for more than 5,000 years, the pair are now on display at the Civic Museum of Modena. That just made my day. And number 1, Spirit Cave. The Spirit Cave mummy is the oldest human mummy found in North America. Officially. I had to obviously save it for my number 1 spot, and it was discovered in 1940 in Spirit Cave 13 miles east of Nevada, United States. It was found by husband and wife archaeological team Sidney and Georgia Wheeler. Aged around 40 years old when he died, the Spirit Cave mummy was one of the first to be dated using accelerated mass spectrometer radiocarbon dating. The Wheelers were surveying archaeological sites, and upon finding the cave they discovered the remains wrapped in tulle matting. Wearing moccasins and wrapped in rabbit skin blankets, the Wheelers also discovered 67 artifacts from the cave such as bowls, cloths, carvings, and art. These artifacts were then examined at the Nevada State Museum where they were initially estimated between 1,500 and 2,000 years old. After the University of California examined 17 Spirit Cave artifacts, the results say that the mummy is approximately 9,500 to 10,000 years old. Yeah, just a bit of a difference there, huh? Just a small difference in age.
Number 10, mummies. This should come as no surprise to anyone, but yeah, mummies. While not the first and not the last civilization to mummify their friends and family, ceasing to exist, they are probably most known for it. Well, that and maybe the pyramids. The pyramids are pretty cool, I guess. The process of mummifying or preserving the body was thought to be important for the soul during the afterlife. If the vessel or your body was not intact, then your soul could get lost. Therefore, if you want the pharaoh to live forever in the afterlife, then you must pickle and preserve the mighty king. I don't want my soul getting lost. Number 9, 40-year-old's worst nightmare. Despite my best efforts and anti-aging cream, there will come a time when I will be old. Personally, I'm not worried about putting some mileage on. That's life. However, something I am concerned about is the effects of aging. Have you ever just noticed that he ain't as limber as he used to be? You get tired easily. And if you have more than 3 beers, you have to lay down for 3 days. However, something that happens to a lot of men reaching their 40s is a little trouble in the bedroom. This was an issue in ancient Egypt, except sadly, there wasn't a messed up process to fix impotence. I know, right? That's crazy. You thought I was gonna say something weird like wrap a snake around it or something. But no. When in modern times the cute waitress at the golf clubhouse just doesn't get your blood pumping anymore, you could reach for a small blue pill that everybody knows. Egyptians did not possess such luxuries and instead prayed for the Pishadil to work. Dear Desert Jeebus, please make my wiener work again. Thank you. Number 8. Ahead of their time. Ancient Egyptians just may have been ahead of their time and didn't know it. The Egyptians had tons of different herbs, plants, and methods for treating all kinds of ailments. Their alchemy skill was maxed out. I never did that. However, one method they came up with may have been helping more than they thought. A porridge mixture that was boiled down that contained tetracycline, which, just in case you didn't know, is known as an antibiotic. This would have been very helpful for the time, as a scrape on the knee could be the difference between living and, well, not living. While this was being used, it's unsure if the Egyptians really knew why this method worked. We doubt they understood the finite details of antibiotics, and I'm not gonna stand here and pretend that I do either, cause I don't. Number 7. Tales from the Crypt Keeper. You didn't think I was gonna talk about mummies and not talk about how they make them, right? Hold on to your spittoons, this is gonna be a rough one. Okay, so we all know that when we pass on, our bodies begin to decay and break down. The Egyptians knew this, so they would have to be one step ahead if they were to have the king pickled in time for the afterlife. Well, first things first, the brains? They gotta go. They would remove the brain with a large spike and sort of mash it up there and well, then they drain the contents from the nose, which that is just disgusting. Stomach, colon, and lungs, well, those won't be needed in the afterlife either, so they gotta go too. But the heart stays though. That's where the soul is. The king was then dried out with mounds of alkaline salt in the world's best beef jerky impression. Afterwards, oils were rubbed into the skin and eventually a resin was applied to aid in the linen wrap sticking to the body, making for that distinct Tupperware brand airtight seal. The pickled king was wrapped numerous more times just to be safe, and then, if he was OG enough, placed into a sarcophagus, and if you're really cool, you'll get your own room full of gold and treasures, and your pet Whiskers, which is a cat, and be mummified because, well, you need him in the afterlife too. That is one heck of an undertaking process. And to be fair, it kinda worked, because there have been a few mummies recovered from Egypt, and they're in amazing condition, considering the age, of course. Number 6, a little off the top. Okay, without the comment section oversharing here, some people have had circumcisions and some haven't. It's a part of life, okay? That's how it goes. Debatable to some, but it happens. This was a common practice in ancient Egypt, claimed to be for hygiene reasons. However, there's something a little bit different about their process. See, today it happens when you're a baby. A strange man comes in the room, and he cuts what he has to cut. L'chaim, it's done. There it is. That's it. It's over. Egyptians waited a little longer, however, closer to the age of 12 or 13. Can you imagine just chilling in the field one day, and then some strange dude grabs you and slaps you down on the table and makes a withdrawal from you to meat and veg? I talked to the chief today, and he just said that's not it. Don't do that. Number 5, bloodletting. The practice of bloodletting was common all over the world, but it may have gotten its start in ancient Egypt. It's a quite simple procedure, really. Black bile out of whack? Lose some blood. Can't stop coughing and sneezing? Drain some blood. Been possessed by demons and now they curse and haunt you as they run up and down your bloodstream? Drain some blood. The question is, however, was this really helping? The short answer, no. No, it wasn't. Besides feeling lightheaded and going pale, this didn't really achieve much, since the days of old were filled with all kinds of other ailments that would easily end someone's life before the spooky demons running up and down someone's bloodstream ever would. I don't feel good. Oh, we better bleed Grandpa again. I don't know, like what? Number 4, plastic surgery. Hey, there's nothing wrong with a little cosmetic surgery. I for one feel that if it'll make you feel better, go for it. Feel better about yourself. Do it. I don't think there's any shame in that. It's been around for a long time, so long that ancient Egyptians might have come up with the first nose jobs. Obviously not like the ones today, but they were knowledgeable in surgeries. After all, you open the chest cavity of a dozen kings and you jot some stuff down on some papyrus, you learn a thing or two. More interesting than shaving down your own beak, however, was their implementation of the prosthesis limbs. Yes, all the way back then, one mummy was actually found with a fake toe. When tested in the modern day with period-accurate sandals, it proved to work quite well and moved more efficiently than first thought. Again, for the time, this was pretty advanced. Number 3. The Ode of the Nile. Imagine people working all day in the blistering sands of Egypt, where the sun beams down on you like, well, the sun in the desert, lifting massive rocks and carving them to shape. I don't know about you guys, but I would be sweating. And that also means I wouldn't be smelling too fresh, resembling that of a high school locker room. Yuck. Well, the Egyptians knew this was an issue, so they came up with what was probably the first underarm deodorant, using nice herbs and other items that had pleasant aromas, and stuck them where the odor was coming from. In your armpits. I just know that after a long day of hard labor in the sun, I would need more than cinnamon sticks and lavender to tame the odor of my sweaty lumberjack armpits. That's just how it goes. Number 2. The Egyptian Brazilian. The 70s have come and gone, and a popular trend today is to be hairless. Everywhere. Even in places where you didn't think it was possible to grow hair when you were younger. Egyptians took it upon themselves to remove all their hair. Well, at least most of it. Not because the Nile River had nice beaches, but because of lice. Oh, yuck. While not an exact cure for the itchy bugs that plague schools across America, it did seem to help. And if you've ever had lice before, you know how bad that sucks. I had them once. It was the worst. Cut my hair, shape my head. Lots of baths. It's no fun, man. Too cute for that. I don't want that. Number 1. Wario breath. Wow. Okay. It makes sense that Egyptians would come up with breath mints and mouthwash. They fed their laborers diets of foods that contained a lot of onions and garlic. Sure, I'm just like everyone else who cooks. And when the recipe asks for 1 onion, maybe I put in 2. When I asked for 2 cloves of garlic, maybe I put in 4. You gotta love that flavor. It was thought that they help fight off disease, and they were kinda right. However, after eating all that flavor, your breath would be something rancid. So herbs and mints were used to help quell the breath that could peel the paint off of walls. Thank God.